When children face harm, the natural expectation is that a mother's soul would collapse under the unbearable weight of sorrow. The world anticipates tears, despair, and an overwhelming sense of loss. Yet, sometimes reality takes a form that unsettles everything we think we know. Imagine watching a grieving parent on television, not broken with anguish, but strangely composed, even smiling. Imagine her explanations shifting, her focus wandering, her reactions starkly different from what the circumstances would suggest. Now picture the only surviving child, a little girl who fought her way back from near death, slowly regaining her ability to speak, and instead of pointing to a faceless villain, she directs suspicion toward her own home. On the night of May 19, 1983, a car sped into the emergency entrance of a hospital in Springfield, Oregon. At the wheel was 27-year-old Diane D., alongside her 3 children who had all suffered severe injuries. 7-year-old Cheryl had already passed away by the time they arrived. 8-year-old Christy and 3-year-old Danny were in critical condition, clinging to life. Diane herself had only a superficial wound on her arm. Her initial story was that of a terrifying roadside attack. She claimed an unknown man had stepped out of the shadows on a rural road, tried to steal her car, and opened fire before vanishing into the night. On the surface, it was the kind of horrifying tale that should have drawn universal sympathy. But something felt unsettling from the very beginning. Doctors noticed her demeanor wasn't that of a mother shattered by loss. While her children fought for their lives, Diane's concerns seemed strangely misdirected, focused more on her personal relationships than on her family's condition. Investigators quickly picked up on the inconsistencies. Her timeline shifted with every retelling. Her tone swung unpredictably from laughter to tears, and she volunteered details that seemed rehearsed. When she later sat down for a televised interview, she smiled, joked, and even casually reenacted the events. Instead of evoking empathy, her performance sent chills across the nation and intensified suspicion among the detectives. The investigation soon shifted from the shadowy stranger to Diane herself. Hidden in her diaries were pages filled with emotional confessions about a man named Robert, someone she desperately longed for, but who made it clear he did not want to take on the responsibility of raising her children. To Diane, her children represented a barrier to her romantic hopes. Authorities concluded that her motive was tied not to the stranger she described, but to a fantasy in which her personal desires outweighed her role as a mother. Still, while circumstantial evidence piled up, prosecutors needed something stronger. A voice from someone who was there. That voice belonged to young Christy, Diane's daughter, who had survived despite being gravely injured. The attack left her unable to speak for months, but through extensive therapy and patience, she slowly regained her ability to communicate. The district attorney spent time building trust with her, gently guiding her until one pivotal day when he asked a simple but crucial question: "Who hurt you?" The answer, though brief, changed everything. Christy pointed not to a stranger, but to her mother. The trial that followed became one of the most closely watched of its time. Christy, still a child but remarkably brave, testified in court. She explained how her mother had pulled the car over that night and then turned on them. Her words became the emotional centerpiece of the case. Meanwhile, Diane continued presenting herself in peculiar ways, arriving to court pregnant with another man's child, seemingly trying to portray herself as nurturing even as she faced charges for harming her own children. The jury was unconvinced. In June 1984, she was convicted of 1 count of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder, receiving a sentence of life plus 50 years. Even at sentencing, Diane never admitted guilt. She insisted she was innocent, continuing to blame the fictional roadside attacker. Her performance was so theatrical that it reinforced the image of a woman unable, or unwilling, to confront reality. But her story didn't end there. In 1987, she staged a bold escape from prison, climbing fences and vanishing for 10 days before being recaptured. That act only cemented the impression of arrogance and defiance that had shadowed her from the very start. Today, Diane D. is in her 70s and remains incarcerated at a women's facility in California. Over the decades, she has appeared before parole boards multiple times, but her requests for release have been denied each time. She continues to insist on her innocence, still clinging to the story of the mysterious stranger despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Her surviving children, Christy and Danny, were adopted by the prosecutor who fought for them in court and have since grown up shielded from the woman who tried to take them away. The case stands as a chilling study of how obsession can warp human behavior. It shows how a parent, driven by an overwhelming desire for personal fulfillment, can lose sight of the very lives entrusted to their care. Diane's story isn't just about crime. It is about the dark potential of unchecked selfishness and the enduring resilience of children who survived the unimaginable. It remains one of the most haunting reminders that not all dangers come from the outside world. In the calm setting of small-town America, family life often appears to be built on ordinary gestures, sharing dinner at the table, sipping a cold drink on a hot day, or enjoying the rhythm of a predictable routine. Yet sometimes, what looks like harmony can conceal shadows no one imagines. Behind one family's facade of warmth, loyalty, and community involvement, there lingered hidden resentments that slowly evolved into something far more sinister. In Springfield, Missouri, neighbors knew Diane S. as a devoted wife, a mother of 4, and a talented church musician. Alongside her husband, Mark, a familiar face in the local music scene, she lived in a modest home that, to the outside eye, looked like a picture of middle-class stability. But behind closed doors, Diane carried a bitterness toward her life, seeing those closest to her not as loved ones, but as barriers holding her back. The first major tragedy occurred on Easter Sunday of 2012. Mark, then 61, passed away suddenly. Doctors ruled his death as natural, finding no immediate reason to question it. Diane, now a widow, received a small insurance payout, and the community rallied around her, offering sympathy for her loss. Yet just 5 months later, grief struck again. Her 26-year-old son, Shah, who had lived with both autism and complications from a past accident, was discovered lifeless in his bedroom. Once again, medical staff attributed the passing to his health struggles. 2 losses in under 6 months seemed an unimaginable twist of fate, and friends of the family whispered about how misfortune appeared to be haunting their household. For Diane, however, these events were part of a calculated pattern. The next target of her growing plan was her daughter, Sarah, then 24 years old. Sarah was a recent college graduate carrying student loans and searching for employment. To her mother, she represented another unwanted weight. In June of 2013, Sarah became severely ill, her body shutting down with symptoms that resembled an aggressive flu. Her kidneys began to fail, doctors fought to stabilize her, and the cause of her condition remained a medical mystery. As Sarah struggled in a hospital bed, the truth began to seep out. Not through medicine, but through whispers from within the church Diane regularly attended. A pastor, disturbed by her casual remarks about the deaths of her husband and son, reached out to law enforcement. This anonymous call triggered an investigation that would unravel a chilling reality. When investigators first questioned Diane, she portrayed herself as a mother crushed under wave after wave of loss. But as detectives pressed her, inconsistencies in her account piled up. Eventually, her mask of grief slipped, and in a startlingly calm admission, she described how she had deliberately harmed her husband and son. She explained that she had added toxic chemicals into drinks they favored, masking them in everyday beverages. Her words were spoken with an unsettling lack of emotion, an almost casual detachment. She claimed she disliked her husband and considered her son to be a source of stress. In her mind, removing them meant freeing herself. She went on to admit that she had been slowly harming Sarah in the same way, targeting her over several days. The most shocking revelation was still to come. Diane revealed that she hadn't acted entirely alone. She implicated her daughter Rachel, then 22, who had been her trusted confidant. Investigators brought Rachel in, and she too confessed. She admitted that she knew about her father's death, had helped plan her brother's demise, and was involved in the attempt to harm Sarah. Their motives overlapped. They saw certain family members not as loved ones, but as unwanted responsibilities. Evidence seized from their home confirmed these confessions. Investigators uncovered Diane's journals filled with dark, rambling thoughts, bitter poetry, and even a cold countdown to her husband's death. They also located the very substances she had used, leaving no doubt about what had unfolded. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Diane eventually pled guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder in 2016, avoiding a potential harsher sentence. She was given life in prison with no chance of release. Rachel, who had cooperated with prosecutors and testified against her mother, also pled guilty. She received 2 life terms but with the possibility of parole someday, in recognition of her cooperation. The courtroom testimonies, the diaries, and the confessions painted a portrait of betrayal that shook the community to its core. Miraculously, Sarah survived her ordeal. Though she endured immense suffering, her resilience allowed her to recover and move forward, becoming the living reminder of the family tragedy that might have consumed her entirely. As for Diane, now in her 60s, she remains incarcerated at a correctional facility in Missouri, where she will spend the rest of her life. Rachel is also still imprisoned, her future uncertain. The story of the Stout family remains a haunting reminder that evil can sometimes wear the mask of normalcy. A smiling face at church, a mother playing the organ on Sunday mornings, a family sharing meals together, all outwardly comforting images, were hiding a reality that was far darker. What makes this case especially unsettling is not just the acts themselves, but the cold, methodical way in which they were carried out, and the chilling lack of remorse that followed. It stands as a cautionary tale about trust, appearances, and the dangers of unchecked resentment festering behind closed doors. In the end, what seemed like a family built on music, tradition, and faith became the backdrop to a tragedy that continues to echo years later. For any parent, the single greatest fear is losing their children in an instant, with no warning, no way to protect them. That nightmare seemed to unfold on the night of October 25, 1994, in the peaceful town of Union, South Carolina. A young mother named Susan S. appeared before cameras, her face streaked with tears, her voice trembling as she begged for the safe return of her 2 boys. Her desperate appeals touched the hearts of millions. Strangers across the country lit candles, tied ribbons around trees, and prayed that Michael, only 3 years old, and Alex, barely 14 months, would somehow be brought back home unharmed. But while the nation wept for her children and rallied to her side, a darker truth lingered beneath the surface. The woman the world saw as a victim was hiding a secret that would horrify the nation once it came to light. The story Susan told in those first hours sounded convincing, even cinematic. She claimed that while stopped at a traffic light, an unknown man approached her car, threatened her, and forced his way inside. She said he ordered her out of the driver's seat and drove off with her Mazda, her 2 little boys still strapped into their car seats in the back. In moments, her life, as she described it, had been torn apart. Her account was shocking, terrifying, and believable enough that investigators mobilized instantly. The FBI joined local authorities, roadblocks went up across the state, helicopters scanned highways, and within hours, the case dominated national headlines. Every news broadcast showed Michael and Alex's faces, 2 smiling, innocent children, accompanied by a mother's anguished pleas for their safe return. Candlelight vigils were held across town. The community wrapped itself around Susan and her estranged husband David, and the story became a symbol of every parent's worst fear. Yet even as the world grieved with her, detectives on the ground began to notice cracks in the narrative. Susan's description of the so-called carjacker was impossibly vague, offering almost no identifying features. During police questioning, she seemed strangely detached at times, her emotional reactions shifting in ways that felt rehearsed. She failed multiple lie detector tests, raising even more suspicion. The image of a terrified, grieving mother was beginning to unravel. Investigators widened their focus, not on a mysterious stranger but on the mother herself. As detectives pieced together her personal life, a possible motive began to emerge. Susan had been involved with a local man from a prominent family. Their relationship, however, had soured. In a letter he wrote to her, he made it painfully clear that he did not want children and was not interested in being a stepfather. For Susan, who longed for stability, wealth, and a romantic future with him, her own sons became obstacles to the life she imagined. His rejection arrived only days before her boys disappeared, creating a timeline that investigators could not ignore. The deeper police looked, the more it appeared that Susan's tragic story was an elaborate fabrication. On the 9th day of the frantic search, the walls finally closed in. Sheriff Howard Wells sat Susan down and confronted her gently but firmly. He told her that investigators no longer believed her story. The supposed carjacking never happened. In that moment, the carefully crafted mask Susan had worn for more than a week crumbled. She broke down and confessed, not to being a victim, but to orchestrating the very tragedy she had begged the nation to mourn. The reality was far more horrifying than anyone had imagined. Susan admitted that on the night of October 25th, she had driven her children to John D. Long Lake, a quiet, shadowed body of water just outside town. There, she stopped the car at the boat ramp. Her boys were in the back seat, likely unaware of what was about to happen. Susan stepped out, released the handbrake, and watched as the vehicle rolled forward, picking up momentum as it slid into the water. The car sank slowly beneath the surface, her two sons trapped inside. For 9 long days, while the country prayed, Susan knew all along that her children were at the bottom of that lake. When divers eventually located the Mazda submerged in 18 feet of water, the truth was confirmed in the most devastating way possible. The sight of the small car being pulled from the lake remains one of the most haunting moments in modern American crime history. It was a collective trauma shared by millions who had believed Susan's tears and trusted her story. What made it even more disturbing was her calculated attempt to blame the crime on a fabricated suspect, exploiting racist stereotypes in hopes of diverting suspicion from herself. The trial that followed was a media storm unlike anything Union had ever seen. Prosecutors portrayed Susan as manipulative and self-serving, arguing that she had ended her children's lives in pursuit of a man who did not want them. The defense countered with a different narrative. They described Susan's deeply troubled upbringing, her history of depression, a suicide attempt in her teenage years, and the years of abuse she endured at the hands of her stepfather. They claimed she was not a cold monster but a woman so emotionally unstable and desperate for love that she experienced a catastrophic mental collapse. The jury faced an agonizing decision. In July of 1995, they found Susan Smith guilty of 2 counts of murder. Prosecutors had sought the death penalty, but after hearing about her traumatic past, the jury chose instead to sentence her to life in prison. That decision sparked heated debate across the nation. Some felt she deserved no mercy, while others argued her mental health struggles made the case far more complex than it appeared. Today, Susan remains incarcerated at Leith Correctional Institution in South Carolina. She turned 53 years old in 2025 and became eligible for parole the year before. The prospect of her release ignited outrage, with countless petitions urging authorities to deny her freedom. For many, the thought of her walking free is unbearable, a painful reminder of the 2 innocent lives that were lost. The case of Susan Smith endures as one of the most infamous crimes in modern American history. It is remembered not only for the devastating loss of Michael and Alex, but also for the way it exposed the fragility of appearances and the dangers of misplaced trust. A mother's tears, once believed to be genuine, were revealed to be part of a performance masking the darkest of secrets. The story forces us to reckon with difficult questions. How well do we truly know the people around us? How far can desperation drive someone? And what happens when personal longing outweighs the most sacred responsibilities of all? More than 3 decades later, the memory of 2 little boys remains, frozen in time as a cautionary tale. Their faces, once broadcast across every screen in America, continue to symbolize innocence lost, while their mother's name has become synonymous with betrayal. The tragedy of Union, South Carolina, is not just about a crime. It is about broken trust, shattered faith, and the chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come not from strangers, but from those we least expect. In every era, stories of mothers have been viewed as the purest form of love and sacrifice. But what happens when that very image, polished and perfected for the world, hides a reality so dark it shakes society to its core? In today's digital age, parenthood has, in many ways, turned into a stage performance. Social media has given rise to countless parenting influencers, often showcasing curated images of their child's milestones, illnesses, or struggles. These posts often inspire compassion, sympathy, and admiration. Yet, hidden beneath the surface of some stories lies a haunting question. What if that display of devotion is nothing more than a carefully manufactured illusion? What if the admiration, donations, and sympathy were built not on love, but on manipulation and exploitation of an innocent child's suffering? This is the story of Lacey Spears, a woman who presented herself online as a brave, selfless single mother, but who harbored secrets darker than anyone could have imagined. To her thousands of followers, she seemed like the very definition of strength, a devoted mom standing tall against constant medical battles for her young son, Garnett. Through her blog titled Garnett's Journey and endless updates across Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, she shared emotional posts and photos, each more heartbreaking than the last. Support poured in. Strangers prayed, offered kind words, and even donated money, believing they were helping a struggling mother fighting for her son's life. But behind the screens, away from the curated snapshots, the truth was far more sinister. Garnett was not born with a terminal illness as many were led to believe. Instead, he was the victim of a disturbing and rare psychological condition his mother suffered from, known as factitious disorder imposed on another, historically called Munchausen by proxy. In such cases, a caregiver intentionally fabricates or even induces health problems in someone under their care to gain attention, sympathy, or admiration. And in Garnett's case, the consequences would prove devastating. From the time he was a baby, Lacey began crafting an elaborate fiction of Garnett's fragile health. She took him to multiple doctors, presenting symptoms that seemed concerning but never quite added up. From supposed ear infections to digestive troubles, from unexplained seizures to claims that he couldn't properly hold down food, Lacey painted a picture of a child battling mysterious illnesses. Each hospital visit became another opportunity for her to play the role of the selfless warrior mom, a role she seemed to crave more than anything else. Her lies were so convincing that medical professionals, trusting her accounts, eventually performed a surgical procedure to implant a feeding tube directly into Garnett's stomach. What was supposed to be a medical lifeline soon became a tool that allowed Lacey unrestricted access to manipulate her son's body in ways no one could have imagined. It was later revealed that she had been administering dangerously high levels of sodium into his feeding bags. To the doctors, Garnett's recurring health issues appeared baffling. Why would his body swing from stability to collapse so suddenly? But to Lacey, each downturn was another opportunity to receive an avalanche of sympathy online. For years, she kept this deadly cycle hidden, carefully balancing Garnett's deteriorating condition with her own growing social media presence. But in January 2014, everything came to a tragic climax. Garnett was admitted to a hospital in New York after suffering seizures. At first, his condition seemed serious but manageable. Then, within hours, his sodium levels spiked to an extreme level, one so high it was nearly incompatible with life. Doctors were stunned. Despite every intervention, Garnett's body could not recover. While medical teams fought desperately to save him, Lacey updated her social media accounts with sorrowful posts and images of her unconscious son, eliciting waves of compassion from her online community. But this time, suspicion began to surface. The medical staff, troubled by inconsistencies and Garnett's inexplicable test results, decided to place hidden surveillance cameras in his hospital room. What they captured was chilling. Twice, Lacey took Garnett and his feeding equipment into the private bathroom where cameras couldn't reach. Each time she emerged, Garnett's condition spiraled downward almost immediately. The footage, paired with his sudden and severe sodium spikes, left little doubt about what had occurred. On January 23, 2014, after days of decline, Garnett was pronounced brain dead. He was only 5 years old. The truth finally began to unravel. Investigators discovered contaminated feeding bags filled with unusually high levels of sodium at Lacey's home. They uncovered 2 separate feeding tubes, one of which had clear traces of tampering. And perhaps most damning of all, her internet search history revealed countless entries about sodium poisoning, seizures in children, and the dangers of elevated salt levels in the body. This was not a confused mother overwhelmed by circumstances. It was a calculated pattern of abuse meticulously planned and executed. As detectives dug deeper into her personal life, even more lies came to light. Lacey had long told friends and online followers that Garnett's father was a brave police officer who had died tragically in a car accident. In reality, Garnett's father was a man named Chris Hill, very much alive, who had spent years trying to be a part of his son's life. Each attempt he made to connect with Garnett was blocked by Lacey, who had carefully constructed her narrative of being a grieving, heroic single mother. The trial that followed in 2015 became a national spectacle. Prosecutors argued that Lacey Spears was a manipulative woman who intentionally inflicted harm on her son for years, all for the validation she received online. They painted her as someone who had traded her child's well-being for likes, shares, and digital sympathy. The defense, however, tried to frame her as mentally unstable, suggesting that her psychological condition drove her actions and that there was no definitive proof she had directly administered the fatal dose. But the combination of video surveillance, contaminated medical equipment, and her damning online search history left the jury with little room for doubt. Lacey Spears was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. During sentencing, the judge delivered a scathing statement, pointing out that instead of nurturing and protecting Garnett, she subjected him to 5 years of suffering and pain. He reminded the court that one did not need to be a psychologist to recognize her condition as factitious disorder imposed on another, a condition that tragically cost Garnett his life. Today, Lacey remains incarcerated at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in New York. Her case continues to stand as one of the most disturbing examples of how the pursuit of attention and validation can twist parental instincts into something unrecognizable. It is also a haunting reminder of the dangers of unchecked narratives on social media, where the boundary between reality and performance can blur, sometimes with devastating consequences. The story of Lacey Spears forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. It shows us how the universal image of motherhood, the one we instinctively trust, can be weaponized for darker purposes. It demonstrates the dangers of blind compassion in the digital world, where sympathy is often given without question. And most of all, it reminds us that behind carefully curated posts, sometimes the truth is far more disturbing than we dare to imagine. Even now, years later, the name Lacey Spears sparks outrage and horror, not only because of the crime itself but because of what it represents. In a world increasingly consumed by social media, her story is a cautionary tale, an extreme example of what can happen when the hunger for validation overtakes basic humanity. It is not just a tale of betrayal and deception, but also a wake-up call to question, to verify, and to never assume that what we see online tells the full story. Every neighborhood has its quiet mysteries. Families carry hidden chapters, old mistakes, private struggles, or long-buried truths tucked away in the attic or concealed behind the locked door of a storage shed. But sometimes those hidden chapters are not simply about forgotten diaries or unpaid bills. Sometimes what rests in those sealed boxes is so devastating that it permanently rewrites the way an entire community sees one of its own. This chilling reality came to light in Pleasant Grove, Utah, a small, predominantly faith-driven town where life usually passed in peaceful rhythms. Neighbors exchanged greetings at grocery stores, children played in front yards, and the sense of safety seemed almost unshakable. Among these families lived a woman named Megan Huntsman. To those who knew her, she blended easily into her surroundings. She was a mother raising 3 daughters, known more for her struggles with alcohol than anything extraordinary. While her reputation carried whispers of a troubled lifestyle, no one could have imagined the true scale of what she had concealed for over a decade. Between 1996 and 2006, inside the modest walls of her family home, Megan carried out a cycle so dark and hidden that even those living under the same roof were completely unaware. Over the span of 10 years, she secretly gave birth multiple times. Instead of welcoming these newborns into the world, she hid their existence entirely. One by one, she placed the infants into small cardboard boxes, carefully sealed them, and stored them away in the garage. Just a few feet away, her 3 surviving daughters grew up, entirely unaware that their mother's most haunting secrets sat only steps from where they played. This hidden tragedy came crashing into reality on April 12, 2014. That day, Darren West, Megan's estranged husband, had recently returned home after serving a prison sentence for drug-related charges. While cleaning out years of accumulated clutter in the garage, he stumbled across a small, taped-up box. Expecting old keepsakes, he opened it, and what he found would unravel the darkest secret Pleasant Grove had ever known. Inside was the preserved remains of a newborn infant, wrapped and hidden away. Shocked, he immediately contacted the authorities. When investigators arrived, they conducted a careful search of the garage. What they uncovered was beyond comprehension. One box led to another, and by the end of their work, they had discovered 7 small containers. Each box held the remains of a baby that Megan had secretly delivered and concealed. Even seasoned investigators were shaken by the discovery. The magnitude of such hidden loss, spread across an entire decade, seemed almost too surreal to believe. Megan Huntsman was located and taken into custody the very same day. What stunned everyone even further was the calmness with which she confessed. In a detached, almost emotionless tone, she admitted that between 1996 and 2006, she had delivered 7 infants in secret. She stated that one had been stillborn, while the others she chose not to keep alive. Each time, she quietly wrapped the infant, placed them into a box, and stored them away in the garage. Her explanation for these actions pointed toward her personal struggles. At the time, she was heavily consumed by addiction and claimed she was incapable of caring for more children. In her view, hiding these births was the only option she saw. The most perplexing part of the story was not just what she did, but how she managed to keep it hidden from everyone around her. Concealing one pregnancy might be possible, but to cover 7 full-term pregnancies within a small household seemed almost impossible. Her husband later stated that he knew she battled substance abuse and that her body often fluctuated in weight, which may have helped mask the pregnancies. But he insisted he never once realized she was expecting during those years. Her ability to live 2 lives, one as an ordinary mother of 3, and another as someone harboring these unthinkable secrets, showed a level of deception that few could comprehend. The investigation confirmed through DNA testing that all 7 of the infants were fathered by Darren West. Although the state of the remains made it impossible to determine the exact cause of each child's death, Megan's own admissions, combined with the evidence, painted a clear picture of repeated hidden births followed by deliberate concealment. For the community of Pleasant Grove, the revelations were devastating. This was not a large city where people rarely know their neighbors. This was a small town where lives were interconnected, where families gathered at the same churches and schools. People struggled to reconcile the Megan they thought they knew, a mother walking her daughters to school, with the reality of what had been hidden in her garage all along. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the possibility of the most severe penalties, Megan chose to plead guilty to 6 counts of murder in 2015. Her decision spared her family, especially her 3 surviving daughters, from the ordeal of a public trial. At her sentencing, the judge did not hold back. He described her actions as cold and horrific, making it clear that society could not excuse or comprehend such prolonged secrecy and loss. She was sentenced to a prison term ranging from 30 years to life, ensuring that she would spend most, if not all, of her remaining years behind bars. When given the chance to speak, Megan only whispered, "I'm so sorry," offering no further explanation for her choices. Her words, fragile and incomplete, left more questions than answers. Why did she choose silence instead of seeking help? How could she continue this hidden cycle for an entire decade without confiding in a single person? And what allowed her to live day to day, cooking meals, raising her 3 daughters, while knowing what was hidden just a few steps away in her own garage? As of 2025, Megan Huntsman remains incarcerated at Utah State Prison. Her case stands as one of the most haunting examples of hidden infant deaths in modern American history. It was not a sudden tragedy fueled by a single moment of panic or despair. This was a repeated pattern choice, one that spanned 10 long years. What makes her story so unforgettable is the way it forces us to question our understanding of human nature. We often assume that parents will naturally protect their children at all costs. But Huntsman's case flips that expectation on its head, showing a reality where secrecy, addiction, and deception created a pattern of unimaginable choices. For Pleasant Grove, the scars remain. The community, once known for its tranquility, will forever carry the memory of being home to one of the nation's darkest family secrets. For Megan's surviving daughters, the burden is even heavier. The realization that the mother who raised them had also concealed so many hidden siblings. In the broader story of women who betrayed the very role of caregiver, Megan Huntsman's name sits alongside other infamous figures. These are women who turned the sacred bond of motherhood into something that shocked the world. Caretakers who harmed instead of protected, guardians who brought fear instead of comfort. Their stories remind us of the fragility of trust and the depths to which human deception can sink. Ultimately, Megan Huntsman's case is not just about one woman's actions. It's about the cracks in perception, the dangers of ignoring warning signs, and the extraordinary lengths people can go to in order to keep their secrets buried. It serves as a chilling reminder that evil does not always wear a mask of menace. It can also hide behind the face of normalcy, blending into neighborhoods, waving politely at neighbors, and raising children in the daylight while hiding the darkest truths in the shadows.